Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Tearing down statues, censoring movies, and banning books. Is this part of Nazi Germany? Oh no, it's part of the rising cancel culture movement sweeping America. And anyone who disagrees with what is deemed, quote, offensive is scared into silence, hounded into submission, or fired. Dale Hurd has this disturbing story.
The censors have come for the children's cartoon Paw Patrol, Gone with the Wind, Legos, the Cracker Barrel restaurant chain, and even a ride at Disney World called Splash Mountain, all in the name of trying to erase the culturally insensitive. It seems nothing is safe from the cancel culture movement. Hollywood stars have gone public to confess their supposed sins of ignoring racial injustice.
I take responsibility.
I take responsibility.
They could also be trying to save their careers. A number of celebrities and corporate heads have already lost their jobs for alleged racism or cultural insensitivity. Even the editorial page editor of the liberal New York Times. Another casualty is the Church of the Highlands in Birmingham, Alabama, with 60,000 attendees. They will no longer be able to meet at local high schools after the pastor liked social media posts supporting President Trump and was declared culturally insensitive. Freedom of speech is continuing to lose ground in America to a kind of socially enforced groupthink. Saying the wrong thing or simply not saying anything could have the thought police deciding you're a bad person.
The worst crimes are committed by people saving the world.
David Horowitz, who led the 60s anti-war movement, says the difference between the Vietnam War protests and the George Floyd protests is that Black Lives Matter has real power to change America, thanks to the backing of the Democratic Party, corporate America, and the media.
Yeah, I find this shocking that so many people cave into this. All the stupid apologies by people, and Hollywood funding the looters. Who do you think is most hurt by these riots? Poor black people. Who's going to be hurt the most by defunding the police and tying their hands? Poor black people.
Even some on the left are now alarmed by the censorship and firings. University of Pennsylvania professor Jonathan Zimmerman, a staunch opponent of President Trump, wrote in the Chicago Tribune that what he calls rituals of public humiliation are not accomplishing anything.
The irony of our moment is you find a lot of people saying, we need an honest conversation about race, but then essentially erecting barriers about what can be said on it. And that's not a formula for an honest conversation.
When I asked Professor Zimmerman if America was headed into dangerous territory, he replied,
"Yeah, we're not headed towards it, we're in it. Like this is not a journey, we've arrived, man."
Zimmerman says America urgently needs a bipartisan movement to defend free speech. Before coming to Christ, political activist Tiana Elisara marched with the left against President Trump.
All my life, I was taught that, there was someone holding me down. The system is against me.
Now she hosts the Left show on social media. She says she understands the hearts of the protesters and those who are censoring.
My heart is heavy because I know they have good intentions, but what I'm most sad about is that they are being grossly manipulated to fit someone's political agenda.
America was founded on the principle of pluralism, the idea that different views are welcome. That America doesn't seem to exist anymore. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Can you imagine? They're even trying to hide a statue of Winston Churchill in England, and Churchill, mounted the great attack against the Nazis. And even Abraham Lincoln, there's a statue of him that's been defaced. Why? Because he was putting his hands tenderly on a black man, and they thought that was something wrong. Listen, 1984, George Orwell predicted what might happen when Big Brother had his way, and it looks like it's coming to pass in America, the land of the free and the home of the brave. We've got to watch it because your freedom matters a great deal. In other news, your loved ones will not have died in vain. That's the president's promise to families of victims who have suffered police brutality. John Jessup has more.
Pat, Senate Republicans are set to release their police reform bill today in response to a recently passed House plan. Public protests and riots fueled by rage over police killings of black men is forcing Washington to take action. And President Trump offered his own solutions Tuesday. White House correspondent Ben Kennedy tells us more.
The executive order addresses the ban on police chokeholds. President Trump said he spoke with faith leaders, members of law enforcement, and even the families of victims of excessive force. Their input helped shape the executive order.
To all of the hurting families, I want you to know that all Americans mourn by your side. Your loved ones will not have died in vain.
That step motivates police agencies nationwide to adopt best practices of use of force. It also requires sharing of information about officers who engage in misconduct.
Nobody wants to get rid of them more than the overwhelming number of really good and great police officers.
The executive order on safe policing for safe communities also launches a co-responder program where health and social workers would join officers on nonviolent calls.
We will provide more resources for co-responders, such as social workers who can help officers manage these complex encounters.
In the wake of George Floyd's death, the order even addresses knee on neck and chokeholds.
Chokeholds will be banned, except if an officer's life is at risk.
Critics maintain the executive order doesn't go far enough. Reverend Al Sharpton calls it toothless, tweeting, "We don't need studies, we need police that commit crimes to be punished. All police that use chokeholds claim their lives were threatened. What's new?"
He did assure each family member that we would and should expect change.
What's needed now is not more stoking of fear and division. We need to bring law enforcement and communities closer together, not to drive them apart.
Now the executive order stops short in banning no-knock warrants. That is one of the demands from these ongoing protests. Ben Kennedy, CBN News.
Thanks, Ben. Pat, we're in a moment where you can see a lot of movement on reforms.
There's a movement of sorts, but the truth is the President of the United States can't order the states what to do. It has to come out of the states. This is a state matter, and these police work for municipalities. In turn, they're responsible to state governors, and unless the reform goes all the way down the line, it won't have any effect. The President of the United States is not able to tell police departments what to do. He can give money to some of them for certain initiatives. That's one of the things, but it's toothless unless it's carried on by the states themselves. And again, when we talked to the senator yesterday, the whole idea of the Police Protective Association means that the police will be fighting, the police union will be fighting certain reforms. But there needs to be a national database of these cops that have been mistreating the people. Those with mental problems, those that are inadequately trained, etc. And they need to be weeded out. I mean, just say, look, you get to fire these people. But the President of the United States, unfortunately, isn't able to do that. Now, there's something else that's coming up, too. There's a tremendous feeling in the courts of America that they do not suppress the right to publish. The Pentagon Papers are an example of that. But now the president says John Bolton is saying things that ought to be repressed. And so he's thinking of bringing a civil suit against John Bolton. And, John, you can tell us more about that.
That is right, Pat. The Justice Department is filing a civil lawsuit to halt the release of John Bolton's upcoming book, accusing President Trump's former national security advisor of failing to properly vet the transcript for classified information. Bolton's publisher says that's not true. Rather, the administration is trying to block a book that's viewed as unfavorable to the president. Well, a potential breakthrough in the treatment for COVID-19. Doctors at Oxford University in the United Kingdom say a common steroid improves survival rates in the sickest patients, raising recovery prospects for people on ventilators by a third.
When somebody comes off a ventilator, do they come off the ventilator dead or alive? and we've improved their chances of coming off that ventilator alive.
The drug is called dexamethasone, and Pat, hospitals in the United Kingdom are already using it as part of their COVID treatment.
Dexamethasone. We're learning all kinds of fancy names. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson is joining us now. Lori, it's good to see you again. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Pat.
Hey, how does this dexamethasone work? Why is it such a big deal?
Pretty good. You got that down. It's a steroid, and it's really fantastic for people who are at death's door, for the sickest of the sick, people who are on ventilators. These are the machines in the hospital that breathe for us. It reduced the death rate of people on vents by 1/3. That's huge. And then also for people who are receiving oxygen to help them breathe, reduced their death rate by 1/5. But also, Pat, really didn't show benefit for anyone else, for people with milder cases. So folks who have access to this or other steroids should really not use that for a more mild case of COVID, because the literature shows that sometimes steroids can actually prolong the duration of COVID-19. So if you have a steroid, talk to your doctor about it. This particular steroid is very common and very cheap. It's only $8 for a pill, and it's also given in IV form. And what it does is it's an anti-inflammatory and calms down that cytokine storm that we know has been killing so many COVID-19 patients. That's when your immune system tries to attack the COVID virus, but just kind of goes crazy into overdrive and starts attacking your own organs and ends up killing you. And so that's what this helps prevent. And even though this study was in the UK and it's now being standard of care in the UK, doctors here in America have been using it for COVID patients off-label.
Lori, how far are we along toward a vaccine? People have been working on it. Are we any closer?
Well, we know that a lot of health officials on the COVID task force and others have been saying a vaccine could be available to the public as early as this fall. We know that there are 70 vaccines in development right now. 10 of them are being tested on people. You know that that's a very long process. You have to first check to make sure that it's safe, and then also make sure that it works in small groups of people and then very large groups of people. And then once the vaccine has been approved, it usually takes 6 months to make enough doses and get it out to all the doctors' offices. So what they're doing right now is they're looking at some of the leading contenders and already starting to mass produce it, so that when these are approved, that they'll be ready to go. Hopefully by the end of the year, we could see hundreds of millions of doses by the end of this year, the beginning of next year. That's what the goal is.
That's incredible good news. I tell you, that thing has been just destroying our economy and destroying the lives of people. Hey, by the way, it looks like that wet market in Wuhan was the source of this COVID thing. Now it looks like there's a little flare of the virus in China. Can you tell us about that?
That's right. For a couple of months in Beijing, there have been no reports of any new cases, and now they're looking at about 150 new cases, according to the Chinese Communist government. And they're saying that this new flare-up started in a market, and so they're not letting any air traffic in and out of Beijing. They've cut air flights, 1,200 flights, 60%. They've shut down the schools, the movie theaters, and a lot of these neighborhoods around that giant market are on lockdown as well. So they're really trying to tamp down that most recent flare-up in Beijing.
Well, I hope they can do it. By the way, it's considered not politically correct to call this thing a Chinese virus, but it came out of China from the wet market. They were mingling wild animals with domestic animals, and there was no sanitation whatsoever. Wendy, thank you very much, Lori.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.